Welcome to another WATG podcast. I'm your host, Cory Jennerjohn, and I'm joined by Sarah Prettyman. She is a opinion columnist for the Utah Statesman. That is the student newspaper for Utah State University. Sarah, thanks a lot for joining the WATG podcast today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Hey, Sarah, if you want to give a brief outline about yourself, go just tell the listeners, just kind of give them a glimpse of who exactly you are.
Well, I'm a sophomore here at Utah State University, majoring in applied mathematics with minors in Russian and statistics. I'm originally from Maryland, so it's a little bit of ways away, but currently living here at Utah State. I work with the university on their student paper, as well as their government relations council and a couple of their volunteer committees.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sarah. So full disclosure, how I found Sarah was I saw an opinion piece that Sarah wrote in the Utah Statesman titled "Gifted and Talented Programs Are Unjust and Essential." If you get a chance, go ahead and read it. It's a very good read. Sarah did a very good job vetting out every single nook and cranny of gifted and talented programs. And Sarah, after I read it, I was thinking to myself, if you were in fact a gifted and talented student yourself coming up through high school, and how have you been infected through gifted and talented learning coming up through high school and into college, would you say?
It's had multiple different effects on me, and I've seen a lot of it coming from even elementary school. Like placement test in like the second grade where I placed in like a higher percentile and ended up staying in that percentile all the way up through my SAT scores. So it's kind of interesting to see how that's still relevant. But I've seen a lot of the disadvantages to it. Being the youngest of 10, my parents didn't have a lot of resources for us growing up. So they had like even in elementary school they had before school programs that I couldn't go to because my mom worked as a nurse throughout the night and was too tired in the morning, of course, to take me. And I'd seen it for like the specialized STEM programs for applying into them. I'd seen the benefits as well. The programs always allowed me to challenge myself. I felt like some of my other classes never were enough. I'd get bored, I'd get distracted, but with like AP classes or even honor placements, they helped stimulate me and as well as other students.
That's interesting. So you kind of mentioned New York City, how they made the decision to kind of phase out, get rid of the gifted and talented program. Are you, when that first happened, Sarah? Were you upset, disappointed? Like, what was your first reaction when you heard that news?
I was kind of shocked, especially being a city. I would have assumed that they would have been more eager for more advanced programs and such. I came from
Mhm.
a rural area, so I was surprised to hear that a city would be doing something such as that. Also, a little bit upset, and then followed by some understanding, just because when you have a city of that size and caliber, there's going to be a lot of different ethnicities, different groups, different types of peoples to have to work with, and they understand their people best.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, so in the article, you make a really good reference to not just making sure kids start out in accelerated programs, but kind of dive into accelerated programs a little bit later, so that we have a really good idea in terms of who these kids are. Do they really belong? Are the tests even fair or right? Because like you mentioned too, like I thought it was a really good example how just because you come from a really good situation doesn't necessarily mean that you truly belong in a gifted and talented program. I thought that was a really interesting point that you made.
Thank you. Um, I'm sorry, one moment. uh, when it came to the advantages certain students can have, uh, I was every time I see like even with like universities and such when they have like their college placements exams, like I think like three of the Ivy League, I'm not sure exactly how many, even they have like certain diversity quotas.
Hmm.
So because you could have 1,000 or you could have like 50,000 applicants, which is around how many they have, and you can have thousands of students that are very very qualified, very like very high SAT scores, very highly listed extracurriculars, but because they were grew up in circumstances where they didn't have to work after school, they could go and play a sport or do an instrument or do a study abroad, because they grew up in situations that were more of the majority, so they had those privileges. um, and I think it's kind of interesting to see how that applies even at the start of education with like younger children and students with disabilities and that are growing up in like more harsh environments.
Do you think, Sarah? Do you think at its core, would you say gift and talented programs, um, the positives far outweigh the negatives, or what? What would you say?
I would definitely say the positives outweigh the negative. I think the problem with gifted and talented programs aren't the programs. I don't think it's the intent behind the program. I think it is an institutional thing. I think it is the test. And I do not believe that the intent behind gifted and talented is to discriminate. I think it is to uplift and give those with those innate talents the ability to express them and figure out what like their true capabilities are.
Okay, all right. So, what do you think the future holds for gifted and talented programs? I mean, where do you think we go from here? Do you think this is going to be a like kind of a starting off point? The New York City decision is going to be a starting off point for other cities, towns, and school districts to phase out their gifted and talented programs. Do you think they're kind of going to follow suit?
In some ways, yes. I could see the public school education going more towards what was introduced when I was in like when I was in my earlier education, like Common Core. Um, I think that in the most blunt way, Common Core, from my experience with it, was horrible. I think the not the intent behind it, but their execution of it, at least in my school district, was abysmal. It was the textbook that they had us use where they would pay thousands of dollars on textbooks and give them to sixth graders and seventh graders, and we wouldn't even touch them because on a higher level, these decisions are being made, like by a politician, by a governor of a city, is making this decision that is affecting all of these individuals, but that doesn't mean they truly comprehend the impact that they're having. But yeah, I think it's going to be in public school education at the very least. It is going to be more, or gifted programs will be phased out and altered.
An idea that I've had, I don't know what you think about this, but an idea that I've had was maybe gifted and talented needs to be more fluid. Maybe in a rural area, the test acceptance rate or application rate is different than another city or suburban community. Yeah, because I don't know, because when you say gift and talented programs, it's not. I feel like it's not a one size fits all. There's so many, like you mentioned in your article. There's so many different factors leading into gifted and talented education for kids. Whether it be in their environment or so many other different factors. I think we have to start taking all those things into account. Would you agree with that?
Yes, 100%. Like I think I even mentioned in my article, like the hierarchy of like public school education. When you think of like a principal or the board of education for it, or even like the lawmakers and legislators on a higher level, it's different on every state level. And this is why we have state governments, and this is why we have local governments, and this is why we have all of those people putting those policies into place, is because gifted and talented programs, or just education programs in general, are supposed to be specified to the area. Like my area growing up versus the high school in Cache County, are like Logan, is very different, and it should be, because they are two different parts of the country. They have very different demographics, very different people they're working with, and as such, the program should be shifted so that it works with those different groups of people.
You mentioned too at Utah State that it's more of an application process for the quote unquote gifted and talented program, which it's not called that. I think that's really interesting. Do you think that the application process itself, like making kids be more assertive for them wanting to be part of an organization like that? Do you think that kind of I don't want to say limits the enrollment or number of people, but do you think that kind of makes it a little bit smaller than it normally would be?
Oh, most definitely. In my application process for Utah State, it was not initially my first choice school or even one of my top choices, so I didn't apply for their honors college. And I know I just know I would have gotten in based off of my qualifications, but even once I got here, I still didn't apply to it just because I realized it just wasn't what I wanted. But if I had been immediately enrolled in it, I would have stayed in it. It's one of those situations where if you have to go out of your way and put incentive to do it, it's different than having it be automatically placed. Like placement tests in schools versus like when you get into high school and you can start picking out what classes you want to take. That's the initiative. So you're going to have less students choose to do that.
Okay. Do you think this is going to lead to? I don't know. I'm just thinking way down the road here. Do you think this is going to have like a tidal wave effect where we could even have changes to like the ACT, SAT in terms of entrance into colleges altogether?
Yes, it's been happening a lot in the result of COVID-19, how it's just been altered. Uh, I know that in some like I know the SAT is like examinations like that have been ruled or have been claimed to have been like biased or discriminatory. Um, Personally, in my experience with the SAT, I feel like some people may put it into a light of being something that's very dark and ominous, but at the end of the day, it is an exam. The prep is all the answers to everything essentially are in the prep books, are in the practice exams. So I personally don't think they should be altered because while some of the questions may be considered ridiculous, at the end of the day, it's something you can study for. Me personally, when I studied for the SAT, I did all 10 practice exams on the SAT website. I did every practice I could, and it worked out for me in the end, but it wasn't easy, but it's not supposed to be. Like, yeah.
I agree 1,000%. Some questions are in fact ridiculous. I can't remember any of them offhand, but I just I still remember. I'm just like, what in the world? Like it was completely random. I was like, what? I
Yeah.
thought that was very strange.
Very, very left field questions.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So let's say, how many people do you think uh, would like to be part of a gifted and talented type program? Do you think, but just don't have the means or don't have the accessibility, or even in their school district, it's just not feasible. Do you think that's a big problem in the United States too?
Yes, it is. I realized, especially coming to college, I thought my high school didn't have a lot of AP classes, and I had a roommate last year who was from Alaska, and her college or her high school had one AP class, and I knew somebody else whose high school had three, and somebody else who had none. Um, and that's also just how it works on a local level, like operating and working around what's feasible, what's practical. But it's definitely makes the selection process for like universities very complicated.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. So, um, do you think? I mean, obviously, this has kind of been talked about before when I've had other guests on. Do you think gifted and talented programs is it fair to label gifted and talented programs as the opposite spectrum of special ed, or do you think that that's not fair?
Um, I think that's not fair because gifted and talented means that you have something extra. You have this uplifted skill, but saying it's the opposite makes it sound as though special ed is something less, but it's not. They're both different things. Um, and I don't think they should be compared or leveled up in a level like that.
Okay, that's I like that answer because what I've heard from several educators is they say if they have to make a choice, they're always going to choose special education because their argument is, well, we can always assign more to gifted and talented kids, and I think that's kind of lazy because I'm not exactly sure that's that's exactly just because you assign more to a certain student doesn't exactly mean that student is being challenged. I don't know. Would you agree with that or not?
Yes. Just by adding, I think the gifted and talented program isn't simply just giving a student a pile of homework and telling them to solve it and adding to the stack. This past summer, I was a STEM mentor for a STEM camp. I actually wrote about an article called UVU Prep, which is
Yep.
a
Yep.
pre-freshman engineering program. And that program, I think, delivered one of the best methods of keeping a gifted and talented program without discriminating against other individuals. Um, we had students there that were of like we had I remember we had one student who just came from Guatemala the previous year and was having difficulties with school. And something that hadn't even occurred to me was when I met her parents, I realized why it was so hard for her to do her homework. Her parents were English speaking, and she was coming with these homework assignments home that were in English. And I hadn't even thought of like the language barrier that comes with those sort of things. And I think a misconception with gifted and talented programs is, well, that's just like belittling the child or like putting them down. And I was like, well, if anything, the fact that it makes me like, or like in that sense as their like educator, that it made me aware of that issue, that's the problem with the gifted and talented programs. It's not the gifted and talented part, it's just the individuals that don't have the right resources and
Oh,
need them.
okay, that's a good point. So it's not exact. It's not just the fact that yes and no, we need this program. It's more about prioritization and just allocating the right resources and feasibility. That's smart. Just it's mainly just kind of just being smart with money and time just to
Mm-hmm.
make it work. All right, Sarah. I appreciate your time. I really appreciate it, and I know that this is a crunch time for finals. So good luck the rest of the way. And like I said, I really appreciate you um, hopping aboard the WATG podcast and kind of just giving your thoughts about gifted and talented education.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Take care.
You too.